All right, peace. It's Bronzebird here with another video. Before I begin, like and subscribe. Thank you. So, uh, just a basic conversation I wanted to have with you guys today. I know Juneteenth just passed. I think it came to a point that it's actually recognized as a federally recognized holiday. I'm not really sure, but there has been certain events where they said that people are taking off for Juneteenth. People are saying that they are not coming into work for Juneteenth. There was something that happened recently about this big discrepancy with a transit agency where engineers decided not to take. There was some big problem with like the union or something like that, but then also about how a lot of them didn't come in that day because it was Juneteenth or the celebration of Juneteenth. It's crazy out here. But I wanted to get to a point today where I actually find it hilarious, where I kind of sensed this was going to happen, and that, you know, in particular, and I'm sorry to say this, but usually when it comes to so-called Black people, they have to make a political stance within a so-called white institution, or the fact of the matter that it's an institution not owned by them, therefore. And what they have to do is remix a lot of these cultural things or these different things that was started in the 17 and 1800s, which is abide by today's citizens every single day. For an example, the Pledge of Allegiance, and how they try to basically make it so that it's in their honor, in their way, and all these different things. And I'm not saying this to say that so-called Black people do not have originality. What I'm usually saying is the fact of the matter is it's lackluster. There's a place and a way to do it where you're doing what you're doing. But if you would, it would make more sense if you was in your owned institution and not doing it in an institution that you don't own and that you're not help funding. Why do I say this? Recently, there was an article that came out, and I first want to also say this was inspired by a post that I actually seen on YouTube by a fellow YouTuber, so thank you for that. Getting to the point of what I'm talking about, I actually seen this morning this woman that decided to make a pledge of allegiance to Pan-Africanism or this, that, and the third. And usually what I start to sense nowadays is a lot of these movements that's taking place with so-called Black people seems to be a cult. And usually more or less these days, I'm usually seeing the arguments with FBA versus non-FBA and those things, and tethers, and FBA versus Caribbeans, or FBA versus everybody, and blah, 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 blah. And how we were the first in this country and adopting this whole entire merit of nationalism and all this other stuff and all this other crap. I'll say something to this, to the so-called African Americans that's usually confused. More than likely, a lot of you so-called African Americans are not from America. The fact of the matter is, when we read up in these history textbooks, it's not a lot of y'all that are Aboriginal. Some of y'all come from different places around the world. It does not mean that just because you're a so-called African American, that you're automatically always has been an American. Now, we can also do this whole entire plight of having an argument about where Native Americans are coming from, that are they really Native Americans? Were they Aboriginal or original to this land? That could be hotly debated, because I know that there's a lot of Aboriginals that may feel like, okay, Native Americans is this, is Native Americans that. That's a whole type of conversation for a different day. But getting back to what I'm getting to, I've seen how far they pushed this whole entire idea of Juneteenth, and about this whole entire factor of trying to get along with this thing of Africanizing or blackifying a lot of these products, a lot of these different things out there, to make a stamp on the idea we're so oppressed, but we need to have our own things now. But having your own things in a sense of the vulnerability, or excuse me, the validation from corporations that's not owned by so-called Black people. Usually it's something that's not a so-called Black business, in which they feel like if they put their stamp of approval on it, that means that they've won ingeniously. And such and so, I made this a topic of conversation on one of my brownstone powwows, in which I had documented, or I had talked about how they have something like Juneteenth ice cream, which is from the manufacturer of Great Value, or just the fact of the matter that they have the Band-Aids that has supposed to have colors that represent so-called Black people's skin tone, different shades of brown. So with this video, I'm gonna basically just give you a synopsis of what I'm talking about. This article that I actually saw that I actually thought was pretty funny. I don't know why, but it was pretty funny. So check this out. Shout outs to Not the Bee. So it says, Wisconsin teacher to first graders. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the Afro-American people. Well, one thing I'll say that this young woman got right is saying Afro-American. Usually I like to use those terms Afro-American. I don't like to oblige myself by using the term African-American. And if you've been on this YouTube channel long enough, you know that I usually say so-called. So shout outs to Harris Rigby. Typically, schools in the United States begin each day with the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. I usually think that's a form of submission through the child's subconscious of stimuli. A patriotic symbol of our loyalty to America and a display of unity that everyone can be involved in. But this teacher in Wisconsin decided to introduce 6-year-old boys and girls to the Pledge of Allegiance to the Pan-African flag, a Black nationalist symbol. And that's the problem with a lot of these schools, man. A lot of them, I mean, you already know that it started off with critical race theory. A lot of my topics of conversation with the Vet Thy Children series usually goes into the topic of conversation where they bring in the LGBTQ. Stirring the pot on your children to be applicable to a lot of the agendas that's supposed to come out in this whole entire quote unquote new world order. More so than that, socialism and all these other things that become a very big salient topic of conversation. Yet this whole entire thing of the Pan-Africanism, that I think revolves around the idea of critical race theory, therefore, but putting on this whole entire thing of big pride with so-called Black people. No need for that. This is not teaching about the Pan-African pledge. This is compulsory. You can see her tell students that they must raise their fist in a Black power salute and encourage them to repeat the racial mantra. Let me guess. This woman is gonna listen to the song by Kendrick Lamar saying, "We gonna be all right." Like that song with him and Pharrell. I mean, I can only imagine how far they're gonna take this, the Pan-African thing. And look, listen, this is not for me to say that so-called Black people shouldn't be proud of themselves. And this is not for me to make a mockery, but just the fact of the matter is you're allowing this stuff to go on in schools. And I'm pretty sure that I would have more respect if it's in an institution that's owned by a so-called Black person. I don't believe in doing the whole entire Pan-African thing. I don't believe in doing the whole entire pro-Black thing and this, that, and the third. Do I believe in so-called Black people? Yes, I do. But it calls for a certain extent where you don't try to make yourself seem better or seem higher just because you need something to prove. So-called, and this is all about a shot at so-called white people, regardless if these Pan-Africans tell me yes or no. This is all a shot to so-called white people because so-called white people have the rulership right now. You don't see so-called Spanish people doing it. You don't see so-called Asian people do it. None of that. This is all just chaos that this Wisconsin teacher decided to do. But anyway, fist up, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, on 3, 1, 2, 3. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the Afro-American people. Under God, I'll protect freedom, seek peace, honor our ancestors. They always like to bring that in, and encourage and support the development and the prosperity of the African descent. This is straight up Black nationalist racial propaganda. And I actually agree with that statement. A Black pledge of allegiance, not to the ideals of America, but a promise to work for the advancements of one particular race. By the way, it was the American flag that fought a war to end slavery. That could be hotly debated. Not an African flag dedicated to the African slavers that sold their neighbors for centuries. This teacher is forcing kids to say this anti-American nonsense in a government school classroom. There is a particular irony that this lady is teaching Black nationalism in a school named after Martin Luther King Jr. And for the most part, I do believe, and I do agree with this article. It's just the fact of the matter that it doesn't cease to amaze me how far they have to go this day and age when it comes to celebrating and talking about so-called Black people. If I had a child right now, my child wouldn't be allowed to be involved in that nonsense. They would know who they are. They would know what their history is, where we come from, and what is our actual lineage and our background. But the problem is with a lot of these schools in which there are a lot of these new age parents, they don't mind all of this happening because they feel like they're rebelling against the system, when in reality, you're not rebelling against it. You're actually becoming a part of it. And so many people don't understand that, but you know, much as so to those that celebrated Juneteenth. If you celebrated Juneteenth, I'm not against you. I'm not sitting up there saying you celebrating Juneteenth is wrong. I'm just making an awareness, the fact of the matter that when it comes to institutions like this, you can expect a lot more of this to happen in your school settings with your child being there. And one day it's going to become an argument between a so-called Black student and a so-called white student, and a so-called white student being looked at as inferior, and a so-called Black student being looked at as superior, but not in the right way, in the wrong way. Peace.